Good evening. Welcome to Thursday Book Club. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And if you'll allow me, Sue Woolfe, I'll do that on your behalf as well, because I understand you're also in Gadigal land. For anyone new or anyone who's forgotten, my name's Suzanne Leal and I'm the author of six novels, most recently The Year We Escaped and The Watchful Wife. Again, many of you will know that Thursday Book Club's been going for what, like almost 6 years. It's incredible. It started as in a panic, really, because I had a book out on the first day that the country shut down for COVID. And this was a way, I suppose, of reaching out and then slowly developed into a community, which has become quite a close one. And it's strange, a lot of you I only know online, but I feel like we've been being friends in person for a long time. If you're new and you'd like to join us, it's easy to do. It's free. If you just go to my website, which is my name, which is suzanneleal.com, and you'll just have to click onto the Substack details. Enough housekeeping. Tonight, I'm so delighted to be here in conversation with my friend and fellow writer, the much lauded, much admired Dr. Sue Woolfe, whose new book is this one, The Girl Who Climbed on Roofs. It's it's a beautiful book. I was just talking to Sue Woolfe about it. Um, in my time, I've read a lot of books and I've judged books, and often or sometimes, only very sometimes, what really impresses me about a book is the meter, the rhythm meter of it. I remember I was reading Robert Gray's memoir, and he's, of course, was a poet, and every word had a meter except one. And that one word in a 500-page or 400-page book stood out. So I was saying to Sue that this is what I loved about this book. It's a book of it's a fascinating, sad, but also hopeful story. But it's a beautiful, poetic story as well. So, in short, Sue, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really pleased you noticed the sound of it because I listen to it as I read it. I don't read it aloud. I think I'd stop in horror if I did, but I hear it in my head. And if I get a sentence too long for what you call a meter or too short, I have to put a few more words in to make it work. I don't know if other writers amongst you know exactly what I mean, but I've never tried to explain it to anyone. So
And
thank you for doing that.
I must say, we've got a number of writers today, like perhaps even. Well, I was trying to think of a collective noun. What is it? Perhaps a cohort of writers. We've got playwrights and we've got poets and novel writers. And those who are well published, those who are on their way to being published. And of course, we have our stalwarts, which is our readers, because what more does a writer need than fabulous readers? Um, Interesting about that meter, when I first started clicking that I needed that myself, it became almost ridiculous. And I thought, by the time I get this sorted, it's going to sound like Dr. Zeus. It's going to be sort of almost rhythmic. It's so the meter is so direct. But I think the interesting thing is that that's not what happens. It becomes a background noise or a background rhythm. Do you agree, or can you tell me a bit about how you make sure it works or how you create it?
I don't create it, I just hear it. It's happening behind me. I've never tried to put this in words, so this is the first time ever I've
Excellent.
experimented
Well, we,
saying
we,
it.
we like to have exclusives.
Yes, this is an exclusive. Um, I hear it, and as I say, if I pull up a sentence too short, it feels wrong, so I have to put in another little adjective or something like that just to make it work. That's all I can say. And I'm not formally trained in music or anything, so it doesn't probably makes no sense to anyone who doesn't do it like that. Does it make any sense to anyone?
We can, yes,
It
there's
does?
some nods.
No.
There can be anyone. Yes, there's a love heart from
There's a
Elizabeth
heart
Bolt.
going up.
There is. And look, if you want to comment, put comments in the chat, and we'll have time for questions afterwards. Um, I'm sort of going a little bit the opposite way that I might have. But I think while we're talking about meter, it might be a nice time, even before we know what the book's about, for you to read a small passage, which doesn't really need too much introduction. It's more the sound of the words and the feel of the environment that I love. Would you like to, are you ready to read that?
Yes,
Page
yes.
10, just a
She's
little.
told me already. Okay. So this is a young girl, and she's about to leave with her family, her home on the river, to live in the city. And she's dreading that. And so the boat was on the rocks below our house, an old wooden boat that had a hole too high to ship water, my brother said, as long as you didn't start sinking. The boat seemed to me shaped like two shells joined together, and I rode sitting low between the two shells like some strange sea creature, my face peeping out every now and then to see where it was taking me. There was nothing to it, my brother said, this rowing. You just sat back to front and leaned forward and back and kept your elbows against your sides, and you used the oars like big plastic spoons, as long as you kept your eye on the hole so you'd know if it was sinking. That last time, as I'd spooned the river, I was already nostalgic then, knowing how much I'd miss it. Even if the windows of the houses reflected not a girl, but a spirit skimming along just above the river's surface, listening to its music, the humming and gurgling and murmuring and sighing and lapping and frothing, the kissing of rocks and the slapping of them, the clanking of pebbles and shells, the swishing as fish hurtled through the air, and stingrays pursuing them leapt up and fell back with a sound like dinner plates landing. And after spooning all this way, would I be able to spoon my way back? That's when I first heard the words of the river's song. It will be given to you, you'll be enough. That day, the river's song went inside me forever.
Which is just as well because your narrator has a difficult time ahead of her, does she not?
Yes.
For those who haven't read the book, can you just tell me a little bit about your narrator, both what she's doing when we meet her and how she comes back to us as a child?
Oh, she's a composer when we meet her. And I dared to write a composer because I had been teaching at ANU under Kim Cuneo, his School of Music, his composer students, for 3 wonderful years. And I learnt so much as I taught them because I'd have little classes and I could hear them and they taught me as much as I taught them. So I could write about what it was like to compose your first piece of music. And I did that as a composer. And so there's two sections in the book. One section is addressed to the reader, and the other section is addressed to the mother of the heroine. And the mother is now dead. So she's really talking to her mother's ghost. And she's telling the story of her childhood and growing up with her mother because she needs to confess why she kept on insisting that she find out what the mother's secret was about. The mother has some terrible tragedy that happened in her childhood, and she's tight lipped about it. And the girl does not know why, but feels she has to know before there's a catastrophe. And the catastrophe means that there's a lot of suspense in the novel because we're waiting with her to find out what it was all about.
I'd venture to say that much of this girl's childhood is itself a catastrophe. She's a child who has to grow up very quickly and who's dealing with an often absent father and a mentally ill and often violent mother. Um, what gives this young narrator the resilience she needs to manage such a childhood?
Well, she's got an old piano that was abandoned by the previous tenants, and she tinkers on that. And she's in love with books, absolutely in love with books, as I think a lot of lonely children are. Um, and uh, and she believes in nature, in not in a belief way. She loves nature, so it's calling to her all the time. It's alive to her as much as anything else is alive.
We keep on going, and the narrator becomes very close to us. I mean, it's in the first person as well. Where did the inspiration come for this story?
No, it was based a bit on my reality, and it was based a lot on as I discovered the truth of my mother's childhood. I found more and more terrible accounts of particularly girls in orphanages and what they were, how they were treated and how they were shamed. And the mystery around my mother was that she wasn't an orphan, so we all assumed she wouldn't be in an orphanage. And it was part of my research to find that uh, only a very small minority of kids in orphanages were orphans. They were usually the home for people whose parents were struggling. If one parent left and you couldn't work in a job and look after your kids too if you're all alone. So there were no social networks from up till about 1970 when we had all those great social reforms. There was no way that anyone could survive both minding children and working.
And what were the orphanages as you research like? I mean, were they places you'd imagine they'd be places where there's benevolence, where there was some kind.
No, no,
What
no.
what did
I'd
you
say
find?
they were very rare. They were very rare. They all of them were. Well, to start with, if they were run by nuns, the nuns usually had come from Ireland. So they themselves had been brought up in orphanages, dreadful institutions, and they just knew how to replicate that. And that's how my mother knew how to behave, to replicate what she'd experienced. People can't really do escape their past if they're not given some handout out of it, some therapy or some way of, or some great understanding person, something out of it. That's why they were all so terrible. And also, the nuns in my mother's orphanage had 120 girls, probably all straining at the bit to be naughty. And they had, about half a dozen nuns trying to control them. I guess it was partly crowd control.
And how does that, you were talking about people behaving only in the way they know, and so replicating the behavior that's happened to them. How, in your experience or in your research, can that be broken?
Okay, there's a fabulous book called um, can you see it? No,
Yes.
Soul's Code. Open I'll put it against my face. And it's by James Hillman. And James Hillman was a Jungian psychologist in America. And this was a bestseller. Um, and in it, he argued, like Plato, that we have inside us an acorn, a destiny encoded in us. And that gives our life purpose. And if we can find that life purpose and live towards it, that will, alongside therapy, get us out of these dreadful situations. He felt that psychiatry had overlooked this and it was really needed in psychiatry to give the other half to therapy.
That reminds me very much of Viktor Frankl,
Oh,
Man's Search for Meaning, which,
yes.
and correct me if I'm wrong, in the chat line, uh, but my understanding is that his thesis, also as a psychiatrist who went through Auschwitz, was that the meaning of life is not a search for happiness, but a search for purpose, which is
Yes.
exactly what I think you're saying.
Yes. Yes.
And what can purpose be? For your narrator, it's music.
Yes, or writing, or acting, or singing, or all sorts of things. Playing tennis, being a marathon runner, being a professor or something. It's something that you long for inside yourself, and you know secretly that you have the great capacity for.
Does everybody have that potential?
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure. Look, I lived in a house where my dad was an artist, so I could see that if you had something that was precious to you, you could survive anything.
What's interesting about you, Sue, is that you're creative, you're a woman of the arts, but you're also a woman of science to some extent. And you've become well known for your teachings on and your workshops, I think, perhaps on neuroscience and its relationship to creativity. Can you just unpack that a little bit for me? What is it and what do you do?
Gladly, but you'll have to stop me because once I start on this, it's my one of my favorite topics.
Well, that's okay.
So,
I could just guide you out. I say, we've had half an hour, that's enough. Okay.
so, okay, I was doing my doctorate at UTS, and that meant the clock was ticking, and it was a creative doctorate. So I had to get a novel written fast, and I had writer's block. And I thought maybe there's some way out of this that science knows. And that led me to neuroscience. And I found that neuroscience, even then, knew a lot about creativity. And I've just kept up with it because it's absolutely fascinating, because it totally discounts all the theories I've heard of. The idea is that one of the most important things that neuroscience has discovered in the last few decades is the default mode network, and that's in our brains. Um, there's a small amount of actual brain, taken up with rational, reasonable, uh, uh, purposeful, predictive thinking. And there's a huge amount that's taken up with the imagination. So if you live in the purposeful, predictable part, you're only using a tiny bit of your brain. It's a necessary part. It's absolutely necessary. But the thing is that it's controlled by a network. So the purposeful thinking is controlled by a network that's called, in amongst neuroscientists, DAN. And the imagination is a different network that goes all over the brain, and it's controlled by the default network. And the reason it's called default is that scientists originally thought that the DAN was the whole brain. And when a woman, Nancy Andreasen, discovered the much wider network, it's the difference between a country town at night with a few lights lighting up and a city at night with the whole place ablaze. Really, it looks like that when they do scans. When this woman discovered the other network, the huge network, the scientists called it, oh, that's only the default network. and and the reason this is important to creativity is you've got to get into that default network. And the only way you can get into it is to know nothing about what you're doing.
Oh.
Yes, because as soon as you know, you snap back, not without your volition, automatically snap back into the DAN. So you've got to know nothing. So it's one of the torments of writing a novel for 8 years like this one, is you've got to know nothing about what you're doing for all that time so you can keep on living in the imagination. You can visit the DAN, but it's remarkably hard unless you're very experienced in it to switch back into the default mode network. Patricia knows all about this, don't you, Patricia? You know how hard it is to force yourself to the default mode network. You've got to really find a way to trick yourself into it.
And for the rational part of me, does that mean that you don't plot ever a novel.
No, no, I don't know how people manage with a plot. I don't know. I'm just amazed that they can. They do tell me they can, and I think they've got some extra gland that I haven't got.
So, how do you start a book?
Anywhere, nothing. I just write and write and write and write. Like the new book is, I have 100,000 words on the
Wow.
desk.
Okay.
But they're nothing. They're just meandering. I'll describe the song of a bird, or I'll go for a walk and hear someone say something funny. So that all that goes down, and I rave about it for a while. And so it's just a whole lot of rambles and raves. Um, and then, do you want to know the whole process?
Yeah, I think we do.
Okay. Then I have that. I do handwriting too, because as you handwrite, you provoke memories. So your creativity is dependent on your memories. As you handwrite, you provoke far more memories. They've shown this in brain scans. I'm telling you, as a neuroscientist, pretend anyway. The brain scans look amazingly different with handwriting than with typing. And that's because as you curve your hand around those letters, I'm sorry, I'm doing it left-handed because I'm left-handed. You've got to use your spatial judgment. You've got to use all sorts of judgment about what you're doing, shaping the letters. And you've also got to, you're provoking memories from your earliest time when you were doing this. So it's full of rich associations for you. So I handwrite. Okay, so this is all handwritten mess on my desk at the moment. Then I gather it up and read it because I'm learning my data. This is my data. So I'm learning my data. And then I start to think, how would a machine process this? So I find categories of subjects usually in it. Or if a word is repeated, like, I don't know, grave, an evocative word like that, I might make that a category. Or I might see that there's a category doing, I don't know, sadness, or someone, or lots of talk about the bush, or about a river or something like that. So I gradually see that there are categories. And then I go from there. At some stage, I type up, but even there, I'm always conscious that I've got to try and let myself be free with the typing and add in all sorts of bits. This is an enormous waste of time, as you can imagine, but it is in essence the book. And usually with my books, nearly a huge amount of that material goes in sooner or later, massaged somehow or other. Then I really believe that there's three basic stories in life, in all the stories. I mean, this is huge simplification. So I try and apply one of those three stories to
What are the three stories?
it.
Mm.
Okay. One of them is The Outsider. One of them is, well, the biography from early to late. And the other one is, well, a journey, if I can do a journey. So if there's a whole lot of description, then I've got a friend who said, I can't write a story because all I want to write about is rocks. I said, write 100,000 words about rocks and put someone escaping at the beginning, and then you can have a whole escape story and you'll have a story. So journeys work.
Fascinating. You, from early on, have been very successful with your writing, and in particular, you came to prominence with your novel Leaning Towards Infinity. So that was early days writing, or at least earlier days. Did you use the same approach for that book?
Yes, yes. That's where I invented this technique, because I wrote a lot of it in Greece and I had a big room and I could do all my categories, and then I could go and find a rock to put on all the categories. And I had this lovely room to myself. It was wonderful. Now I've only got a desk above the washing machine. So anyway, um, yes, that was when I realized. And it was also one of those books that was a sort of I couldn't work out what not to put in it, so I put everything in it. And it still wasn't working just before, about 4 days before, oh, this is old-fashioned times, the printing presses rolled. And someone said to me, oh, Hypatia is a very underused character. And I thought, oh, that's Hypatia's the narrator. So I quickly had to rewrite it all to fix it up so that Hypatia tells the whole story. So yes, I write in a terrifying muddle.
And so, if we were interviewing about that book, bearing in mind how that book was formed, leaning towards infinity, and there were lots of interviews, you were fated. And my question is, so what's it about? What do you say?
Oh, I look so sorry. I've talked about this so much. I've got it down to
Go
pat.
for it. Go for it. That's
Um,
excellent.
it's about a woman who discovers a new sort of number, um, and uh, and she has trouble announcing it to the world or convincing anybody, but in the end, she does.
And when did you know that was it? That's what the book was
Of
about.
course, at the end, of course, at the end, you only know when the book finally agrees to tell you.
As a I'm going to misquote, I think, Kafka now, but when I young, I did German at uni. My understanding was Kafka said that you really own the irony of life is you only have the understanding of it on the point of death,
Yes, that's
unless you're writing a novel your way, and then you
yes.
have the understanding at the end of each novel.
Yes, yes. Well, the same with this novel. I didn't realize about the composer until about a year and a half before I finally finished it. And that's in the stretch of 8 years. Stephen read an early draft and he will agree with me that it was an awful mess before that. But the composer somehow brought it all together.
Hmm. And when you look at the book now, how do when do you know it's finished? How do you let it go?
Oh, that's really hard to tell. That's really hard to tell. Look, one of the things that I must warn no one should ever do this is I started sending it out too early because I kept thinking it was finished. Because you don't know when, if you write like this, because you have no plan, Suzanne, I quite agree this would help.
Mm.
You don't know when it's finished. So I kept on sending it out for, uh, this is embarrassing, 2 years. And each time there was a uh, quiet, absolute silence from a publisher. I'd wait about 2 months and then I'd think, they don't like it. It can't be finished. So I'd rewrite it. So this is no way to behave. But eventually, when I sent it out to a publisher and she said yes in 2 weeks, I thought, oh,
It's
I've written enough. I fixed it up.
I think it's time for questions. I've monopolized you for the last half an hour. Now, I think the best way we'll do it, given the number we are tonight, is chat questions. So if there's anything you'd like to say or anything you'd like to ask, please pop that in the chat. In the meantime, we are readers, as you know, Sue. What do you think we should read, or what have you been reading?
Oh, I've lost myself, so I can't see if this book is. Yes, here we are. I just sent away for this book, which I found reviewed in the New York Review of Books, and it's David Grieg's The Book of I, and it's the most wonderful story. It's set in Scotland in 825, and
Wow.
it starts off with these Vikings rowing across the ocean to this beautiful island, the island of Iona, and some people might have been there. And they're going to burn down the monastery and get every bit of silver or whatever they can find there, and also kill all the monks. And the other main character is a monk, a young monk, who hides in literally the shithole of the community. So he's underneath what we'd call a toilet. He's actually standing in the ship, and he hides there, and he escapes the massacre. But he decides to stay on the island despite everyone saying he must go. He decides to stay because he's got to respect the saint that the monastery is named after. And the third character is a woman who is saved because she's a great cook, and she is making mead, and she has this great vat of mead. And when an assailant comes in to murder her, she gives him this mead, and it's so delicious and it's full of herbs and stuff. And he keeps on drinking it, and he collapses on the floor, and he gets buried by his mates as they leave. All the Vikings go, and they leave him buried, and he forces himself out of the ground. And I think he's going to become. I haven't read the whole. It's just so good that I have to. I look forward every night to having a bit of a read before I fall asleep.
Oh,
The
that's
other one is Margaret Duras'.
oh.
Um, this is her very first novel, The Impudent Ones, and it's been published recently. I'm a great Duras fan, so much so that I made myself, when I was younger, um, memorize passages out of The Loved Ones. Does anyone else know The Loved Ones? It's so good, it's worth memorizing. So she wasn't quite up to speed with her first novel, um, but it's still got her hallmarks. She's wonderful. She writes. She was fated in Paris because she is such a honest writer about women's sexuality,
Mhm.
and it's not quite there with this one. I think she had to discover that in her writing, um, as she grew older. But it's still got lots of great duress feeling about it. She's great at invoking people's passions. Uh, yes. And the other one is, oh, this is my secret advice. I'm fascinated with early Christianity, and I'm desperate to know more. And the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels. Does anyone know this? I'm fascinated by Mary and the Gnostic Gospels, and uh, I'm a bit obsessed by it. I'm trying not to let it into my writing.
Excellent. Well, thank you for very interesting three choices, which you haven't had before. I'm just going to get into the chat lines and okay, so we've Elizabeth Walton, who's a writer, poet, musician. Can you tell us about the relationship between your exegesis and the creative work in your PhD?
Oh yes, yeah. I'm trying to actually remember. It
That
was a
degree you did, yeah.
that degree. It was about the Secret Cure was the name of it, and that was fascinating because I used, as I said, this method. I didn't know what I was doing, and I had I got some grant from New South Wales Uni that enabled me to sit in their science labs, which was wonderful fun. So I would sit in their science labs and listen to all the talk and watch what everyone was doing. And they thought I was writing down all their clever experiments, but what I was writing about was, as I watched them, was someone leaning against the fridge and flirting with another scientist, and they're both wearing lab coats, and she looked very elegant in hers. And I was agog with science. I was very excited about it. It was just written at the time when they were figuring out the human genome. I don't know if you remember all that, but um, and what had that to do? Well, no, I was depending on my research that I was finding out because I was so ignorant about what I was doing. I knew it was about science, but I had written most of the book before I knew what the experiment was about. And it wasn't until I was, oh, I know, I was taking a writing retreat in Italy. And I walked into this hotel lobby in Florence. And there on the table, the lobby table, was folded a newspaper with exactly what I needed for my research. And that's happens to writers. It's this serendipity. It happens. The world gives us things. The universe sends us messages. It's if we're totally open to it.
Hold that thought. This is a question from Victoria Butler, also a writer. Um, Hi, Sue. I did a few courses with you many years ago at the New South Wales Writers Centre, and one of the most enduring things I learnt from you was the idea of loose construing. Loose construing. I love the term because it gave language to something I was already experiencing as a writer. Your researcher has explored the interplay between conscious craft and unconscious discovery. Do you think neuroscience has brought us closer to understanding creative insight, or has it simply shown us how much we still don't know?
Ah, what a question. Great question. I I think, well, if the trouble is that science keeps creativity very narrow in its definition. So a practitioner like me has to go in and say, look, it's all right, everyone. We're not talking about the sudden moment of insight. We're talking about days and days of creativity, which is what we depend on if we're in a long work of creation. And so, yes, I do think it's making possible for me to talk to you about this and to be able to say, I have some clear idea how memories are stored in our brain and how if we get any thought at all, that triggers something and triggers something else. And I have a clear picture in my brain of how memories are stored because they're stored a bit like fish scales, and it depends on um, wavelengths. And if 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 you hear the sound of the ocean as a particular wavelength, and you hear the sound of a bite of an apple in your head as the same thing, they will be stored next to each other and because light is stored near light. And that means that when you write about the ocean, you may immediately jump to an apple. And that's because your brain is floating freely. And we know that now. We know that that maybe is part of creativity. The connections between memories that would seem to anyone else to be unrelated, but to you are related. And it's up to us as we create to see the link and to see why they're connected. Was that any sort of answer?
That's an excellent answer. I'll
Oh,
answer for Victoria. We've got one. I'm mindful of the time. We've just got yes, and Victoria's given you a heart, so I'd take that as a yes.
thank you.
Um, Geraldine Mellett has a question. Geraldine, also a writer and a broadcaster and presenter. Such a wonderful, rich chat tonight. Thank you, Sue. I really relate to what you said about the default network. Can you talk a bit more about accessing that part of the brain? And have you written about this? There's a bit more. I found during the very long period writing my novel that I worked best when I turned up every day because it seemed to give a signal to my brain to work on it in the background, even when I wasn't watching, and new things would come forth. I
Mm.
learned one trick about visualizing, putting a question you have about character or plot into a lift, then pressing the door and letting the lift descend. A couple of days later, you visualize pressing the button to bring the lift, and there will be an answer. Not necessarily the answer, but an answer. Will I take you back to that earlier question? The question was, can
Yes.
you talk a bit more about accessing that part of the brain, the default network part, and have you written about this?
Oh, absolutely. If you look me up on Google Scholar, if you can use that, I've published quite a few papers on it. I am writing with Patricia Townsend, who's here tonight, a book, and we're writing letters to each other about our creative processes. And when that's published, you'll be able to read all the real true stuff about what it's like for a writer and an artist to create. But okay, I think the most important thing for me to say is the access to it is by leaving your mind, taking your mind into a blank. So if you're a meditator, that's a big help. So go into meditation and just sit with your work. And what you've got to respect is anything that comes into your mind. It won't be what you expect, but that's because the unconscious has its own life and you've got to allow it to have that. So don't you boss it around. Let it be the controller. Because if you control it, you won't get those wild, imaginative things. You won't get links between an apple and a breaker. You won't get those links. You need those links to be able to access your full creativity.
And this is why Sue has taught composers, playwrights, musicians, and writers. Thank you so much, Sue, for such a masterclass in writing and being a writer. And congratulations on this very beautiful novel. May it
Thank you.
fly in the world.
Thank you. And thanks for all those hearts and smiles. And thank you very much. You've been a great fun for a lot of people to talk to. Thank you. And
Good.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming, and see you next week, hopefully. Okay. Bye. Thank you, Sue. Bye.